Okay, go ahead.
Man's name was Joe Hurley, and Joe decided he wanted to have a lovely home in Mammoth. He was the skier. And then a couple of months later, we had dinner with them again, and he said, you know, I've decided instead of building a home, I'm going to build a hotel. And I want it to be a beautiful hotel, like the one in Yosemite, something special. And he had never, been involved in any kind of building like that, but he decided that that's what he wanted to do, and he wanted Herb to be on the board of directors and handle the publicity for this project. So at that time, Herb had sold his company and decided, okay, that would be something he would like. And Joe asked us to invest in Mammoth Mountain Inn, which we were not willing to do. And so Herb took a year off, went to Mammoth, and worked with Joe Hurley, and they built this beautiful hotel called Mammoth Mountain Inn, and I stayed here in LA and continued to teach, and we communicated by phone, and finally Herb had to come back. Ultimately, the hotel failed for many, many reasons, and Jim came to us for a loan for the hotel, and we said only if he personally guaranteed it, and which he did. So then at the end, as it was bankrupt several times, as it was going downhill again, they had a contractor who built the hotel had several children, and so the arrangement with the contractor was that he would live in this home with many bedrooms, and he would pay the mortgage on it, which he did not do. So Jim Hurley asked Herb if he would take over the payments. They would put the house in our name, and then when he was able to revive the hotel again, we would simply give it back. So it turned out that we ended up keeping the house, making the payments, and we were finished with our relationship with Jim Hurley and Mammoth Mountain Inn. But we had to make the payments, which were small looking at it today, but in those days it was a lot of money for us, and we were living on a small income, and Herb hadn't worked for a year. So we
How big is this house?
We decided to do something, and Herb thought of making it into a facility, a pension for ski clubs. And one of the men who was on the board of directors with Herb for the Jim Hurley's hotel owned Litton Industries, which was a big company at that time in San Fernando Valley. And Herb said, your company has a ski club. May I show them pictures of the house and what we plan to do for a ski club? And he said, absolutely. And in fact, I'll come to your show. So Herb took pictures, and we put together a plan for making this big house a pension. And we got that ski club, and Herb went to several other people that he knew, and we ended up with about 4 or 5 ski clubs that used us as their facility. And so our second source of income became Ross Lodge at Mammoth Lakes.
Do you remember what year this was, or how old you were?
It was 1958.
1958. And how old was Tracy around at
He
that
was
time?
born in 53.
Okay.
So we started the winter business, and then during the summer, because I was a teacher, and Tracy was very bright, we decided, and the children that I was teaching were gifted that particular year, and we decided to do a 2-week program at Mammoth in the summertime for these children. And I was going to write my master's thesis on how gifted children behaved in a non-academic environment. So we did it, and I did not write the paper, sadly. I should have, but I just ran out of
Not enough time.
And so from that, Mammoth Mountain Summer Camp was born, and we stayed in that business for 20 years.
So 1958 to about 19...
It was actually started in 1960.
1960.
60 to 80. In 1980, unfortunately, I began to have angina attacks, very, very severe, and Herb was very concerned that I would not survive. So we sold the company, Mammoth, and retired.
I know that you traveled with her. When did the travel start?
It started very early in I think our first trip was 1968. We wanted to go to Hawaii, and we went to a travel agent, and I was seated in front of the desk, and he was slightly behind me, and I said to the travel agent, we want to book a trip to Hawaii. And Herb spoke up and said, and to Tahiti. And I just was shocked. We had not talked about Tahiti. Anyway, we ended up going to Tahiti, had a fantastic time, and my love of travel was born.
Do you remember? So that was in
68.
68. Do you know how many places you traveled?
Over 60 countries. Well over 60 countries. Every continent. We traveled very inexpensively. We used to use the $5 Fromer book for Europe on $5 a day, and we actually did that. And then when we learned how to do that, how to find these places to stay in that were very inexpensive, and that is how we traveled for most of our travel years.
What do you think inspired you to visit 60 odd countries?
I wanted to see every part of the world. I wanted to stand on the northernmost point of each continent and the southernmost point. I wanted to go to the North Pole and the South Pole. I don't know why. I mean, I came from a family did nothing like that, but that's what I wanted. Herb did not have that. He wanted to do things. He wanted to scuba dive. He wanted to windsail. He wanted to do those things. And he didn't have the burning desire that I had, but he was willing. So we went to all these places, and he didn't like planning trips, so I planned them. and then I would always insert either skiing or windsurfing or scuba diving in nearly all of the places, not all of them, but many of them, so he would be able to do the things that made him eager to go. Until I decided one day I wanted to go to Russia. We had been to Russia. I wanted to go to the name has just escaped me, Siberia. And because my brother, Ralph, who also loved to travel, went to Siberia and enjoyed it enormously. We had already been to Russia twice before, but in the western part of Russia. And so I said to Herb, I want to go to Siberia. And he said, you don't go to Siberia, you get sent to Siberia. And I laughed and said, I want to go. And he said, I'm not going to Siberia. So I said, but I really want to go. And he said, I'm not going to Siberia. So I went to the travel agent and I booked a trip for myself. And I didn't say anything to him. And I got all my flights planned and all of that, and my tickets, and I put them down on the coffee table, and Herb said, what's that? And I said, that's my trip to Siberia. And he said, you're not going to Siberia alone. So I said, yes, I am. Well, he was extremely angry, and he didn't speak to me for several days. And then he finally came and he said, okay, I'm not letting you go alone. I will go with you. So I had to change everything around, and we went. And of course, he had a fantastic time.
Did you also?
Yes, I had a wonderful time. Actually, he had a better time, and that was true in almost every country. For one thing, he was very good at language. He learned foreign languages very well. He spoke 4 languages fluently. And when we were going to a country like Russia, before we went, he got a tape and put it in the car, and he would play the tape from Berlitz and learn the language. And not, of course, only a limited amount of Russian, but enough so we were able to use it for small things as we traveled. But he was fluent in French. And not only was he fluent in it, but he had learned the language from a French family that he lived with in Algiers. And they were from Paris. And Parisians have a different accent than the rest of the country. And it is considered the elite French. So if you spoke French with a Parisian accent, that made you a little higher class. And so we traveled frequently to France because I loved Paris, and life there, because of his fluent language, we lived as if we were French.
Tell me about your favorite place.
Paris was my favorite place. Not as far as interest was concerned. I think the Antarctic was the most unusual and interesting place. Paris was a place I wanted to live in. And I loved their way of life. I loved their food. I thought the city was gorgeous. I was very comfortable there because of his ability with French. And we shopped in the little stores, little individual shops that sold cheese in one shop and fish in another shop. They didn't have, at that time, supermarkets and actually still don't in that part of Paris. They do now in a different part of Paris. And I loved it. I wasn't good at it, but I loved that way of life.
How many times have you been to Paris?
10 times. And at least 3 of those times we stayed 3 months.
You stayed in Paris for 3 months?
Yeah.
And
we lived in this little inexpensive hotel apartment that had, you know, a little kitchen, and so and we took our kids. We took Tracy and our grandson and to Paris and showed them. I mean, we stayed there. We didn't stay in any fancy hotel at all. So hopefully they had a love of Paris as well.